Thank you, Gary. Well, welcome to our webinar today. We are so pleased to have you online. I'm here with Dr. Antoinette Meeks, who I will introduce in just a little bit, but we're going to get started with orienting you to the screen to your right. I know that you can see a PowerPoint slide that talks about locating the questions window in the control panel. So if you can look down your control panel, you'll see things like dashboard and attendees and polls maybe. There will be one labeled questions, and there's a plus sign up in the corner. If you would like to post at any time now or throughout the 1-hour webinar today, if you'd like to post at any time a question for me or for Dr. Meeks, you can post it and we will address it at our very earliest possible time. So if you click on the plus sign, you can type your assessment question into it and then click enter to share it with the presenters and attendees, or you can send a question just to presenter and organizers, I believe, or panelist and organizer, it may say. You're all muted so that we don't have to worry about background noise. If you have a question, you can click on the hand sign that you may find near your name, and someone will help you very quickly. So, and that's in the attendees section. And so we will go from here. So as you're locating that and thinking about what questions you might have, we're going to get started and talk about assessment. And it's really important that assessment be something that we consider right from the very beginning. Yes, assessment is how we measure things quite often at the end, but today we're going to talk about keeping it in mind as we progress through. And if you think about it, assessment brings up very, very different feelings for different people. For some of us, it's as easy as it appears to be for the monkey in the upper right-hand corner. For some of us, or for some of our students, it might be a very difficult thing. It might be a lot of family pressure. For many of us, it feels like we are up against our peers, and certainly our students feel that way. For many of our students and many of us, it causes all kinds of physical responses, maybe right down to heart palpitations, and certainly it is how we measure. For some of us, it feels like success. For some of us, not so much. For our students in particular, it really can be a matter of a green check, which means we're good to go, or that much dreaded red check, or do we get a ribbon, or do we feel rejected as students? Do we look at our peers who are doing well and wonder how it is they're doing well, and we wonder, do we feel approval? Do we feel like we're never going to make it, or do we just feel like giving up and just forgetting about it, wiping out maybe? So what does assessment mean to our students? Let's take a look at what it could mean. What if assessment, where we generally think of it as the teacher or someone larger than ourselves, someone somehow more important than ourselves, looking at us as a group and measuring us one against another, or all of us against criteria? What if instead of that, it was the teacher helping the student through assessment and really inviting the student to join us side by side, because the word assessment comes from the Latin word assidere, to sit beside. To sit beside. Now that gives an entirely different picture of assessment. Imagine a student feeling like he or she is a partner with the teacher, working side by side with the teacher with the student, to learn together and to gather tools together to make improvements. There are two main types of assessment, and you know these kinds of things. There is assessment for learning, and we know a lot about formative and summative assessment, but let's take a look at this carefully. Assessment for learning. Formative assessment can be used two ways, for formative as well as assessment of learning, but mostly formative assessment is progressive assessment. Little by little we do it. It's more informal. It's mostly for students, their teachers, and sometimes their parents. It really doesn't require a grade, and in fact it's often a good idea not to worry about the grade so much as it is simply, where were you doing really well? Where are you struggling? Where do you feel like you are needing some more work? It informs teacher planning. It lets the teacher know how the student might need some differentiated instruction. It also helps the student become very engaged in terms of self-assessment, and the student can be very instrumental in measuring his or her gap assessment. So instead of the student saying, I don't know what I don't know, the student can, with careful planning and with the right kinds of assessment for learning, the student can actually identify the gaps in his or her learning. Let's look at assessment of learning. And of course this comes into some types of formative and summative assessment, and certainly summative assessment is at the end. It provides a summary, excuse me, a summary of learning. And the audience changes somewhat. Yes, it informs the students, but it is a little bit more of an endpoint rather than along the way while there's still something to be done about it. Along the way as assessment for learning is. It's more for teachers, administrators, and perhaps outside agencies. It provides for planning and policy data. It is a data gatherer in many ways, and it informs decisions. So we have the two main types of assessment, and we used to think of that as formative versus summative, and I would present to you the idea that there is assessment for learning that helps us learn, teachers and students, and assessment of learning. Moving on, let's talk about why we would really work at assessment for learning. For teachers and students, it's really a great way to measure what is working in the classroom, and equally importantly, and maybe more importantly, what's not working in the classroom for that student. For the students, it's a chance to succeed, to become much more independent learners, to really become engaged and very, very involved in their own learning, to personalize it. Maybe their ability to respond is more in the nature of a graphic organizer, or to respond in writing, or to respond via a picture, or some sort of a response that might not be the normal response that you might look for in a classroom, in your own classroom in the arts, but it is personalized because the student perhaps has some more ways of responding. And then it gives the students ownership of their learning, and that ownership really is encouraging to students and gives them a greater sense that they can do it, that they can succeed. For teachers, remember that image of two people sitting side by side, the teacher and the student working together. For the teachers, this gives them a chance to gain insight into students' motivation, their interests, their learning styles, and this is really critical, and their needs for differentiated learning. And this information comes from the Oregon Small School Initiative, known as E3. So if you can imagine, as your students are in your classes, your music, dance, theater, and visual art classes, as you move through the classroom, even in a choral or instrumental setting where you often see very large groups, how could you work in the choral setting, letting go of the piano and moving through the chorus, in the band, getting off the podium and moving through the instruments to hear them playing, letting them work without a conductor, moving through the dancers, watching them from behind, asking them questions. How could you work with the students to make them feel engaged in their own learning and formative learning as they go? So looking at types of assessment for learning, there are rubrics or scales, and the students can help develop them, particularly with teacher guidance. Not that we want to spend a lot of class time on them grinding through the individual language, but the more students use rubrics that their teachers have developed, the more they begin to be comfortable with rubrics or scales language. And there are also interactive rubrics, and I'm going to share an interactive rubric with you in just a moment, but I want to continue with this slide first. So an interactive rubric, which could include links to other instructional materials or perhaps some digital work areas, online work areas that are shared with other students. QRs, which are quick response codes. You see them in magazines and stores all the time, and you can probably see one on the top. That's an edible QR, by the way. That's a barcode of sorts, a two-dimensional barcode, and people with smartphones take pictures of them, and then they can see the information that's associated with it. Assessment for learning can also take shape as exhibitions. So as students, and this isn't just visual art, but as students have prepared something perhaps in terms of research or a project, they can be hosts or docents in their own gallery walks to share with other students or parents or their teacher what they've done. They can explain it. What they have presented. Portfolios, and portfolios of course have come from the world of visual art, and they've done a lot of wonderful work in portfolio development and taught the rest of us a great deal about portfolios. And this requires of students a great deal of reflective time and samples of their work, documentation of what they've done, some formative teacher feedback as well as their own feedback and maybe that of their peers. And there are even some great portfolio samples coming out now. There's a great one published, and I'll have to try to get that one to you. It's somebody from, and it's lost to me, so I'll have to find a way to share it with you. But it's a student portfolio for listening and for practice and for performance as well. A great opportunity for students to do some guided analysis of their work. So let's go on and take a quick look at some an interactive rubric. This was brought to my attention through an article on EdUtopia, which of course is a very arts-friendly publication. And this was posted by Michelle, and I hope I pronounce her last name right. She's a National Board certified teacher in a high school in Freehold, New Jersey, Michelle Lampinen. And there is a picture credit in here from the Daring Librarian, and you can see that she's used a QC, and I'm going to try to get my pointer active. She's used a QC, this is a two-dimensional barcode. This is what I meant earlier, and students can point their smartphones at it, and they can recognize that through their smartphone through a digital app. And so this teacher was working with an IB class, and having the students write an IB to prepare them for an exam. She was having them write an essay, and one of the things she needed for them to do in this particular class was to have them integrate quotations. And so one of the lines in the rubric is on quotations, so they needed to be embedded smoothly and not stand alone, and she had here the descriptions of various levels, and then she embedded both a link to a wonderful video she found online. She used the QR code from a Google site, an educational Google site. And so she has the URL, she has the QR code, and it's embedded right within the rubric. So the students, she went to them, and she, in the next class after she did this interactive rubric, and she had it online for them in a communal space. And by the way, the link to this article is at the bottom of the slide if you want to copy it down, and it's also on the final slide of today's presentation. So she she thought, gee, I hope they can use this. So in the next class, she asked the students if any of them had seen it. And not only had the students seen it, but this very simple way of communicating with students digitally, some of the students had already gone to it, used it, and really found the video very helpful. And I looked at the video and I thought, well, yes, it is a very, very helpful video. So this was a very easy way, and of course this would be very appealing to students to have something digital, because that really speaks to how they've been brought up. These are digital natives who we're working with right now. So this is a way to have an interactive rubric with students if you can find resources for them to go to. So moving forward, why assess for learning? And this is a quote from Rick Stiggins, who some of you might have heard from. And this is from an article he wrote, Promoting Sound Assessment in Every Classroom. And the emphasis on this latter portion of the quote is mine. But this is really, truly important. And the part that I found most intriguing, if formative assessment is really, over time, about more frequent, then assessment for learning is really about continuous assessment. And so if students have an idea, an ongoing idea of how they're doing, and students want that, I think, more than anything, how am I doing? How am I doing? Am I doing okay? They really want to know how they're doing. And if they make an incremental gain, they want to know that they're doing a little bit better. They really want to know. And so if they've made just some change for the better, that is such a cause for celebration with some students, and we might be able to save some of the students who, as of third grade, are already feeling like defeated learners, and by middle school and the beginning of high school, we've lost them. Research on effects. Student achievement really improves dynamically, and this calls on some research, but after synthesizing over 250 studies, Bloom and his students and some others found that that research on the effects showed that assessment for learning really showed the best gains for low achievers, and they're the students who most need to celebrate and become involved in their learning, because they need to know when they're succeeding. And then Stiggins' report showed some gains in their TIMS math performance. In the arts, continuing research also shows the importance of accurate formative feedback. We have to be very careful, because in the arts we quite often, as we're working on students, we sometimes overgeneralize and say, well, that's good. But what is good? We need to be very careful about overgeneralizing and about giving false positives. We need to ask students to be very explicit in what they're describing to us, and we need to be very explicit in how we're responding to them, and to be specific. In all content areas, there's need for greater training. In fact, that just happened to be the topic when I was finishing my doctorate, and the finding of my my dissertation. In all content areas, people are most comfortable. Obviously, it's not a big finding, but people are most comfortable in assessing if they've been well trained in it. So looking in isolation, every learning goal, and we're now relating assessment to arts course descriptions. Looking in isolation, and we've dealt with learning goals in a previous webinar, webinar 2, which I hope you either were part of, or you may have, you may go to the link where you registered for today's webinar, and you can go through the archived version and get points for it. So every learning goal that you develop must also include a series of success criteria and the associated benchmarks with that learning goal. And then the success criteria are sort of the bridge between that learning goal. They break out that learning goal into greater detail, and they break out the detail of the learning goal into relating to the associated activity or activities associated with helping students learn. and meet that learning goal. So let's look at a specific lesson and learning goal with its success criteria, and let's look at one for theater today. So the learning goal is we are creating ideas for writing plays. So the learning goal is learning how to come up with ideas for playwriting. And then the success criteria that comes under that to help break it out into something is written in student-friendly language and from the student's perspective. So you could put this up on the wall for students to see, to read, and to become engaged in, so they know exactly what's going on. We are creating ideas for writing plays, and then from the student's standpoint, I can, based on a teacher-provided prompt, I can write properly formatted dialogue for one or more characters. I can develop characters using that dialogue. I can improve my writing by self-assessment and also by hearing from my peers, and I can critique peers in a positive manner. And so all of those are part of that learning goal. And then the lesson objective, as you can see, is a beginning experience in playwriting. It's about building a safe environment and encouraging creative risk-taking among new playwrights. And here you have listed 2 theater benchmarks and a standard from what we've been calling Common Core and what is in the process of being renumbered and will be known as Florida Standards. So there is a revising, editing, and rewriting standard from the Florida Standards and 2 theater benchmarks. And so as students work on this, then the success criteria can be moved right into a rubric from that success criteria. And the success criteria come right down under score 3. And so is the dialogue believable? Can the student make it sound natural? Are the character traits evident? Can you make them a little bit more subtle? The dialogue is formatted correctly, and it's written for both characters in this particular lesson plans with 3 lines each as directed. Under 4.0, this is a little bit more over the top. Here, students are able to coach others perhaps, or they've gone beyond. Character traits are very subtle, and yet they're evident. Dialogue is very, very natural. Student is able to coach others. And then to the right are the areas where maybe they didn't quite get everything there. Can they finish writing the dialogue? Can they finish formatting it correctly? And so as students go through here, they could look at their own attempts at script writing, at playwriting, and they could go through and self-assess, as well as self-assessing with, or as assessing formatively with the teachers. So here's a rubric or a scale, not necessarily an interactive one, but it could be made interactive if students, if the teacher wanted to look for assessment or playwriting how-to videos or particular resources, and could connect his or her students to them electronically. I'm about to introduce to you our guest speaker. I want to remind you that at the end of Dr. Meek's presentation, there's going to be a brief time for question and answers. And so again, I would remind you, as you look down the line, there is a question area. If you would like to ask Dr. Meek's questions, or if you have questions about what you've just heard about assessment for and assessment of learning, then you can ask your questions over here, because your lines are muted to prevent background noise from interfering with the recording. So if you would like to send to all or send privately, you can type your questions in to Dr. Meeks or to myself, and those can be lining up, and when Dr. Meeks has completed her short presentation, then you'll be able to ask her questions and she will address them for you. So I am so pleased. Dr. Meeks and I have been friends for a number of years, Dr. Meeks is a wonderful and very well-informed woman. She is currently the project manager of the district-developed assessments for hard-to-measure content, one area of which is the performing arts and dance, music, and theater, and of course the visual arts. And you can see on your screen the list of the others that are included in that list of content areas defined as hard to measure, because so much of it is active and requires some authentic assessment. And Dr. Meeks is with the Office of Race to the Top Assessments, which is located in the Florida Department of Education. Dr. Meeks was formerly the Assistant Director and Health Coordinator in the Florida Department of Education Office of Healthy Schools, which was in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction. She has been a teacher, athletic coach, and district-level curriculum specialist in the state of Florida. She has taught at the undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate doctoral levels as an adjunct professor at 3 state universities here in Florida. And she has held national offices and provided expert services for other states. As I said, Dr. Meeks is very knowledgeable, very well informed, and very experienced. So please welcome with me Dr. Meeks. Dr. Meeks, are you all set?
I am all set.
Okay. And if you can speak up just a little bit, here's your first screen.
Okay. The first screen basically just gives you my contact information. Should you need to follow up with me, email probably is better than the telephone, but either will work just as well. Go ahead and go on to the second slide. I work with, as Dr. Levins pointed out, the content areas that you see on your screen. Specifically, I work with 4 fiscal agents, 4 public school districts, Miami-Dade, Hillsborough, Polk, and Duval, that were awarded competitive contracts to assist with the development of high-quality, cognitively complex assessment items that represent the different kinds of item types. So these individuals, the leads who work within these districts, have worked with different public schools around the state, including recent retirees. You've got teachers and district folks involved, and your professional organizations on the development of these items. Not only do they write or provide training for individuals who are writing these items, training is also provided for folks for the reviewing of these different items. The assessment items are created for the specific courses that we've identified through, again, a competitive process. Or actually, we looked at the highest enrolled courses at the time that the request for proposal was being developed. And the items are based on, again, the course description and the standards that are associated with each of those courses. Go ahead and go on to the next slide, third slide. These items are being created within the Florida Interim Assessment Item Bank and Test Platform, better known as the IBTP or Florida Item Bank. It is indeed a statewide resource, and there are 2 sections to this bank. On one side, we have the area where items are currently being developed. They're developed, they go through 3 levels, 2 to 3 levels of review depending on the project. That includes editorial and content, and those 2 could potentially be combined. And then a leadership review. Leadership could consist, and in the case of performing arts, it does consist of a steering committee that's involved with the review of the items. So these are folks who are potentially district supervisors as well as leads within your statewide organizations. The items are reviewed, and then they are forwarded excuse me, to the Department of Education. If, for whatever reason, there's an issue with the item will be returned from the state level to the leads or to the leadership level, and they'll determine whether they want to correct the item, send it back to the item writer for the item writer to retool the item, or just reject it straight out. Should the item pass muster, should it be found to meet minimum standards, then it could potentially be moved over into the other section of the bank, which is the test builder tool. On that side, teachers are able to build assessments, whether we're talking a quiz or a major exam, just an exam that includes a performance task where the student will create something, do something over time, whatever that looks like for that particular teacher, a constructed response, short answer, open response item, using the test builder tool. You're able to grade the assessment and also maintain the grading information within the test builder section of the item bank for at least a year. So you'll have data on your students, and what's nice is that there are certain reports that will be available as well. So you can see how your students are doing either as a group, within a class, across classes, or look at the development of a particular student using those reports that are available to you. There's tiered access, and I'll talk more about that tiered access in a different slide, but know that there are different security levels, and we'll talk about that. There will be, or there are training modules included which help you understand, one, how to utilize the system, also how to develop an item, a high-quality item, as well as reviewing items. There are several different kinds of training modules that exist. Currently, for administrators, there are 2-hour webinars being held. They began on yesterday, the 12th, and will run through the 22nd, which will provide an overview of the item bank. So as an introductory kind of a tool for folks. You can develop, again, diagnostic, interim, or summative assessments for your students. Now, this is where if a district decides to create end-of-course exams using our assessment items, then they're able to use the test builder and at their security level develop those end-of-course exams. And again, it could be the supervisors, performing arts or performing fine arts supervisors working with their assessment folks or other curriculum folks or teachers within the district. However it is they determine they want to come together and potentially use this site to develop end-of-course exams. One myth that exists out there is that we, through this project, are developing end-of-course exams or exams, period. We are not. We are only developing assessment items. That is our charge. You then may take those assessment items and build diagnostic, interim, summative tests to use with your students within your district. Okay, go ahead and move on to the next slide. We have just completed our field testing. Field testing gave us an opportunity to look at the items that were developed over the course of the last couple of years. We were able to determine whether these were items that we want to continue to keep in the bank, so accept them, adjust them, reject them, and look at whether items needed to be created to fill the gap. If there were gaps determined to exist within a course, perhaps there weren't enough developed for a specific benchmark, or certain kinds of item types were developed, but it lends itself to additional item types. So going back and looking at the item specifications document and making any adjustments that need to be made as a result of the field test. Field testing also allowed us to look at the item bank and determine some of the features perhaps that we had not considered, or some things that were problematic, because this was also a testing of the system, and be able to correct those so that once it became available or becomes available to schools and district teachers in 2014-15, then we have the best product available for folks to utilize. We want to go through the issues now versus later. And I will tell you, with some of the performing arts items, we the vendor had updated the system. There was time for a new version, and depending on whether you configured your Internet Explorer or not, determined whether there was a certain button that was very important, whether it was actually there on the student screen, because the student needs to be able to click on that particular button to provide a response. So discovering issues now versus discovering those issues once the system is available is not helpful for anyone. Within the item bank, you'll be able to store assessment items, or we're able to store assessment items. Once this project is complete, we'll have somewhere around 80 or 90,000, should they all pass muster, available for use across the different subject areas. It permits creation, revision, and review of assessment items. I've talked about that. And you can create items with just text, with audio and video, or audio or video along with the text. It also allows the user to search for an assessment item, whether by grade level or content, the standard. The test platform will allow you here to actually develop your test. That's extremely important for folks, because that's really what you want to be able to do with the system. And I've talked about the reports that will provide you with feedback as far as your students go. There's also a tutorial that helps you learn how to develop a test map from the items that exist, which will lead you to developing a test form, which would be the final product that your student is ultimately going to see when he or she takes the test. You may administer your test either as a computer-based test or a paper-based test. If it's computer-based, again, the information is going to be available for you to look at in terms of being able to compare where that student was, perhaps at the beginning of the year or at the middle of the year, or look at how they compare in terms of their knowledge in with this particular group of students or another group, or however you want to look at that student and his or her growth, or the growth of your students as a whole. If it's paper-based, then you're going to have to input information. You don't have the same richness, but there are times when that's what you want, a paper-based test, and that's okay too. There will be some scanning capabilities, so you'll be able to scan information in as well. We do have online scoring. The big elephant in the room was the inability to score centrally. So that's something that we're working on, and that will be a part of our next update or the next release or version of the item bank before you even have access to it in the fall. That will be included and tested to make sure that there are no issues if we're looking at central scoring versus me scoring my students. Now, going back and talking about creation of items, can you create items that are just for your students? Yes. Can you create items that are that you can share with other people in your school? Yes, if you give permission to other folks to see those items. Can you share potentially with folks within a group of districts? We're looking at being able to provide that as well. If you create an item and you think it's something that you really think should be a part of the statewide bank, can you do that too? Yes. Any item that you move forward to the state level but will be vetted at the state level. Any item that's created locally, it's either going to be something that is the responsibility of the teacher if it's something you're just maintaining within your classroom, or however the district has it set up if it's something that would be shared across the board with many schools within the district. So there is an opportunity for you to create items that are yours, that you're going to use with your students, as well as within the district, and also items that you can share with the state that will be vetted with the state. If an item is created within the test platform, that generally means that it's going to remain there locally. If it's created within the item bank, then it will go through the vetting process at the state level. The tutorials will explain that further once those are available. Okay, next slide. All right, I talked about the tiered access. There are 5 levels, 4 of which are secure levels. The first level, Tier 1, are items that will remain at the state level and will be used with different state programs for assessment purposes. At Tier 2, you have items that will be available to the district office. This potentially could be where in the course items, exam items, would be used for your assessment purposes. So if a district is going to develop in the course exams using these items, this is where they're going to be housed. Initially, the majority of the items that we're creating will be housed at this particular level. The next level, Tier 3, provides school level access. That could be your principal, assistant principal, whomever is responsible for curriculum, whomever your leaders are on campus who may be interested in developing some school-wide assessments or subject-level assessment for the teachers and students at their school. Tier 4, that's where the teachers will have their items and will be able to use those again for the development of assessments with their students. And Tier 5 requires no security. It's public access. This is where parents, students, and sometimes there may be some items that teachers want to grab from that level. That's okay too. But the parents and the students and other interested citizens can visit this particular level and get an idea as to the kinds of items that would exist potentially at the other levels. We believe that our items will probably have about a 3-year shelf life. And as they're used, they can be moved down from one level to another. So once they're used at the state level, they may have value at the district level and so on. And of course, there's going to be the need to continuously develop new items as these items get old. So we're looking at how that potentially can be done, as well as I'm sure districts are looking at that as well. We did not cover all of the courses again. We just looked at the highest enrolled courses, and that's where we are within the projects that we're responsible for. And so altogether, it's about 160 courses that we're working on, but there are others out there that are working on additional courses as well for not only hard to measure areas, but the so-called core areas as well. And Linda, if there are any questions, that's my presentation for this afternoon.
Okay. Does someone have a question for Dr. Meeks? Something that you would like to ask, something perhaps you've heard in your district, or something you heard Dr. Meeks say and you'd like her to expand on it? What can we do for you this afternoon to help you know more about the assessment in the arts? This is the hardest part of this webinar.
Well, the good news is if there are no questions now, I am available by telephone or email later, and I'll gladly follow up.
I don't know if any of you have found where it says attendees, folks. If any of you have a question, what you can do, there's a little hand symbol, and you can raise your hand, and we can unmute you if you would rather, instead of typing your question, if you'd rather ask the question verbally out loud. If you want to raise your hand, you can do that as well. I think the hand symbol is above, actually, for you. Is there anyone who has a question? Ah, Marilyn, let me see if I can unmute you. Marilyn, did you have a question, or were you playing with your playing with a hand symbol? Marilyn, are you there? Marilyn? Perhaps not. Is there anybody else who has a question? Well, what I think I'll do, in the absence of questions at this point, I'm going to move on through. I don't see any questions on the question board. And let me see. I've got just a couple of other things. What I am going to ask of each of you is if you would please, right at the end of this, fill out the very, very brief feedback form. What that does is you can see by this gear diagram in the purple, it says your feedback on today turns the gear of more grant funding, and with more grant funding, then we can do future professional development for you at no cost to you and to your colleagues. So if you can do that for us, then that allows that to become part of the reporting, and it also helps us to provide more targeted professional development for you. So that feedback form will only take a couple of minutes. It is online, and that will help us exponentially, beyond belief. There are 3 webinars that have preceded this one. You can go to the same area where you signed up for this particular webinar, and you can go through the webinar, complete its feedback form, and then get in touch with FAAE, and they can send you, and are happy to send you, a certificate of completion for points in your district. And again, this is at absolutely no cost to you. So if you would like to do that, I'm wondering, as I'm going through this, Hillary, did you have a question? Hillary Fine, did you have a question? I'm not sure. Gary, is she able to I've unmuted her. Should she be able to speak?
She's posted her question on the web on your question bar.
Okay. Hillary, are you able to type into the question bar?
She already has posted the question for you.
Ah, and I didn't see it. Thank you. Hang on just a minute. I see that you don't have a speaker. Dr. Meeks, Hillary has asked, when will the Race to the Top assessments be coming to the schools?
The item bank will be available towards the beginning. There's going to be a rollout of the system, but towards the beginning of the 2014-15 school year.
Okay, so toward the beginning of the 2014, thank you, Hillary, for doing that. I appreciate it. And now I see your note that says you don't have a speaker. The rollout for these, for the schools, will be toward the beginning of the 2014-2015 school year.
Yes.
And is that to test your students school-wide? Hillary has asked. Dr. Meeks?
For whatever your purposes happen to be, the entire system will be available again through a rollout, and the items will be available for folks at each of the levels that I identified earlier. So hopefully I answered a question.
So the answer, I think, to your question, Hillary, is yes, and for anything else that you want to, that you would have use for out of that system. Does anybody else have a question? Thank you so much, Hillary. I appreciate that. Okay. So there's a listing of the webinars that we've already done. This is our final webinar, and there is a summit put on by the Florida Alliance for Arts Education this summer. It comes up from June 18th to the 20th at the Hilton Doubletree in Orlando. And all of you, by virtue of making time to be on these webinars, are leaders in your own right. And this is a very exciting, everything I've heard about it is sounding very exciting. There are, until May 31st, savings for those of you who register early. It is in Central Florida, so convenient to most of us in Florida. And on the 20th, there's an Arts Integration Showcase from 9 to 10:15 a.m. And so there will be speakers and artists, and we're going to talk about the creative workforce and the creative economy. So I do hope that I will see all of you there. And then just in closing, I want to remind you that Edutopia article link on interactive rubrics is at the bottom of the page. But in the meantime, once again, I do thank you for your support and for being with us today. The webinar has been presented by the Florida Alliance for Arts Education, usually presented as FAAE, and it was made possible by a grant through the Florida Department of Education. This has been Dr. Linda Lovins, presenter. I am a director consultant with Linda Lovins and Associates, and our guest speaker today has been the very wonderful Dr. Antoinette Meeks, and she is the project director with the Office of Race to the Top Assessments, housed at the Florida Department of Education. Her email is there, and that is her recommended method of contacting her. So I hope to see you at the summit. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to contact either one of us, and we will be happy to do whatever we can. Or you can contact the Florida Alliance for Arts Education, and you can get help with any one of the three of us. We'd be glad to help you. If there are no further questions, and I'm going to take one last look, if there are no further questions, then I believe that closes our webinar for today. Once again, thank you to Dr. Meeks and to the Florida Alliance for Arts Education and the grant provided to us by the Florida Department of Education. Thank you all for the time you've taken to be here today. Take care, and I hope the closing of your school year and your summer goes well. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.